West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
A Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is at it again, comparing President Biden's effort to vaccinate more Americans to the Nazis, weeks after she supposedly apologized for comparing COVID restrictions to the Nazis. Now, here's how we got here. With COVID cases up now in 27 states, the Biden administration is launching a new door-to-door campaign to try and get more Americans vaccinated. Congresswoman Taylor attacked the program on Twitter, writing, and I quote, "Biden pushing a vaccine that is not FDA approved shows COVID is a political tool used to control people. People have a choice. They don't need your medical brown shirts showing up at their door ordering vaccinations. You can't force people to be part of the human experiment," end quote. Now, keeping them honest, the brown shirts, also called stormtroopers, were a paramilitary group that played a big role in the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party. In the 1930s as well as the 40s, which of course was then led to the Holocaust and the genocide of 6 million Jews and others. Greene's tweet comes weeks after she said this about mask-wearing rules at the Capitol.
You know, we can look back in a time in history where people were told to wear a gold star, and they were definitely treated like second-class citizens, so much so that they were put in trains and taken to gas chambers in Nazi Germany. And this is exactly the type of abuse that Nancy Pelosi is talking about.
Greene came under fire for that from both sides of the aisle, actually. She even got a rare reprimand from GOP House Leader Kevin McCarthy. So later, she decided to take in a bit of history and toured the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And afterward, she seemed to have learned a lesson. Here's what she told reporters.
There is no comparison to the Holocaust. And there are words that I have said and remarks that I've made that I know are offensive. And for that, I want to apologize.
There is no comparison to the Holocaust, she said there. So much for that today. Asked about it today, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said, quote, "We don't take any of our health and medical advice from Marjorie Taylor Greene. I can assure everyone of that," unquote.
Abby Phillip is anchor of Inside Politics Sunday, and Bill Kristol is editor-at-large of The Bulwark. Bill, a trip to the Holocaust Museum, then an apology, now doing it again. I struggle to understand why this could possibly continue happening. One doesn't just come up with a reference to brown shirts.
I mean, she believes that the current American government is a dictatorship, but full of people who have ill will towards their fellow Americans. I take it she believes that people who work for the CDC or public health organizations at the state level who might try to get people to take the vaccine are morally equivalent to people in the Nazi regime. She seems to think that the Biden administration is somewhat like it's a dictatorial administration. So for me, it's not just about the inappropriateness, the vulgarity, the trivialization of the Holocaust, which is pretty disgusting. It shows how anti-American Marjorie Taylor Greene and her part of the Trumpist right is. They hate, they don't think that these are, think of the way they attack the military, people who serve the federal government, physicians at the CDC. They think these people, they think nothing of calling, as you say, of comparing these people to Nazis.
So, Abby, I want to play what Greene said after visiting the Holocaust Museum a few weeks ago, because she did apologize then.
The Holocaust there's nothing comparable to it. It happened, and over 6 million Jewish people were murdered. And there are words that I have said and remarks that I've made that I know are offensive, and for that I want to apologize.
That came after House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy had condemned her comments then. Abby, nothing from GOP leadership on the latest comments about brown shirts. I mean, will McCarthy take real action here, or does Greene ultimately know that she can pretty much say whatever she wants at this point, Abby?
Yeah, I do think that it's been clear for a long time that Marjorie Taylor Greene is setting the agenda in a lot of ways when it comes to Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. He's been reluctant to push back on her, reluctant to do it privately and publicly. And the reason that she gave that apology, which I think now we can call what it is a stunt, it was because McCarthy was attempting at that time to try to pressure Democrats to pull the committee assignments of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and also trying to create this sort of scenario in which Greene apologized for her controversial comments while Congresswoman Omar did not. So I think the whole purpose of this was just a little bit of a political stunt, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, obviously, based on her comments then, knows better. She knows that the comparisons to the Holocaust are completely inappropriate and terrible, but she's doing it anyway because she also knows that there are no consequences when it comes to Republican leadership.
Mm. And Bill, so it's Greene's latest comments about the Holocaust, but we're also learning about former President Trump's comments as well. According to an upcoming book by Wall Street Journal reporter Michael Bender, then President Trump allegedly praised Hitler during a discussion with his White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly. This was in 2018. Trump reportedly said, and I quote, "Hitler did a lot of good things." So Bill, of course, a Trump spokeswoman, denies he said that. Who would admit to having said that? Can you just talk about that for a moment, that such a thing could have been said, and why you think those comments are different from Greene's Nazi comments?
Just one more word on Greene. I mean, she needs to apologize to the people who work at the CDC, the people who work in public health, the officials of the U.S. government, civilian employees, military employees, and of state governments, and of hospitals all over the country, et cetera, who are doing their best to help their fellow Americans. They're the ones she's insulted the most. It's not just that she's trivialized the memory of the Holocaust. The Holocaust, it is what it is, and it will survive. The accurate history will survive the comments of Marjorie Taylor Greene. But she needs to apologize to her fellow Americans. In terms of Trump, there I think it does reveal something about him, which is he admires authoritarians. I'm not going to say he admires Hitler entirely. That would be maybe a little unfair. But he's praised the Chinese for Tiananmen Square. He criticized at the time Gorbachev for being too soft and not crushing dissent. He admires strong men. And in that respect, he may not admire everything one hopes Hitler did, but he can't help but sort of have that, say something nice about him. John Kelly should step forward. I mean, this is reported by Michael Bender, a very reputable journalist, based on presumably information from Kelly. I think they were the only two in this conversation, right? Maybe not directly from Kelly, maybe from a third party to whom John Kelly reported this conversation. Trump's spokeswoman is now just flat out denying it. So who's telling the truth? I mean, John Kelly should confirm or not whether Trump said this.
Right. Well, of course, Trump's spokespeople have not earned anyone's credibility. But yes, John Kelly knows what happened. So he should say exactly what happened, what the context was, whether it's true or not. So, Abby, how do comments like Trump's, like Greene's, play with GOP voters?
I think the very fact that Greene is making the comments that she's making publicly and repeatedly tells you that she believes that this is popular in the Republican base. And I think that that's probably right. If you are online and you kind of are in the circles where, conservatives, Trump conservatives are talking, they make these comparisons too. So it's not as if this is coming out of left field. This is something that has resonance in that part of the conservative movement, and that's why it's happening. That it's sad to say, but the truth is it has, I think, almost no negative effect when it comes to Trump's voters. If not, she's doing it because I think she thinks it'll help her.
It is Friday, the 9th of July of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, folks, because we are all night hawks in the Diner of Life. The French 77s, which is the cocktail of choice here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, are virtually mixed, poured, and ready for your virtual imbibing pleasure. So do take care, even in the virtual world, because though it be a very tasty cocktail, it be a potent spirit. All right, we made it to Friday, and it's so much different than the Fridays we had for 4 years with that you-know-who. And he's back in the news again, I guess. He sells tickets. Tickets to hell. And I guess that's where they want to go. The unvaccinated continue to be the only people dying of COVID in ICUs and ERs across America. And when I say across America, in those areas that are hotbeds for the kind of thinking that would think vaccinations are bad. Jeez. All right. You don't listen to science? Well, I guess the world and all of existence will catch up with you. Ignorance, I guess, is bliss. If your definition of bliss is, I don't know, eliminationist of self, eek. I want to hold on to it. Just because I'd like to ponder the beauty of a flower, unencumbered by all the turmoil that is crashing down around us. All right. Well, there is no crime wave washing across America, no matter what they tell you. Boy, they're really working us up. Remember the history of Western expansion and how it happened. It wasn't by accident, okay? It was definitely by design. And guns played a very important part in Western expansion. How did that work? Well, you put some settlers out into some land that, it's not theirs. But you just put them out there. Say, hey, we're here, we're friendly. Want to learn how to live off the land like you folk. And, they try to get along. And then the U.S. government, through, some private traders, and you can call them traitors or traders, but they were traders, and sell a few guns to the indigenous population. And then, I don't know, rile them up in some fashion so that there's the inevitable retaliation. And then what? Oh, well, we have to build a fort to protect all these settlers that are being attacked by these riled up indigenous peoples that just happen to be here in our way. And we leapfrogged across America from sea to shining sea with that method. And it worked pretty damn well. Put a settler outside into the frontier behind your fort. Sell some weaponry to the indigenous population. Rile them up. And then build a fort to protect the people that, you put in harm's way. Or so they say. Don't teach the kids that. That might be critical race theory. It was a race to see who could get across America. And I guess we won. Yeah, whoever we are. Oh, man. Well, it's Friday. And since we are all Nighthawks in the diner of life, these considerations are due to be pondered over a fine, well-balanced French 77. What is available to us, there's so much more news in the world, of course, but, we try to take some care and curate down and have some things that are fairly interesting. But we might as well tell you what is available here for the rest of our time in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and later on at the chef's table, because we do have some amuse-bouche waiting for you. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene at the top keeps making anti-Semitic comments because it helps her with Trump's base. I would expect a leader to tell their people when they are wrong, not stoke their bigotries, not take advantage of their ignorance for a crass hold onto power. But that's just me. I'm a romantic. On the rest of the menu, Louis DeJoy's Postal Service plans will imperil community newspapers. He just wants to destroy as much of America as he can. He is embedded in, it's like a tick. And we can't get him out without causing a bad infection, apparently. I don't know why he's still there. Don't we hold now the seats on that governor board? We'll look into that when we get into that little offering. Tom Cotton wants an Air Force Academy professor canceled for teaching about racism. Oh, did I mention she's a woman? And Oregon issued an emergency order to adopt the most protective heat rules for workers in the U.S. since people were falling over dead. Just spontaneous death in the heat. You got to have some kind of rules about that. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Prime Minister Trudeau says Canada will not welcome unvaccinated tourists for some time. And Brazil cannot stand Bolsonaro more than they ever have before. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link right there by the social media scroll. And the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly, for doing so. And Kelly will be at Netroots Nation this year in D.C., so stay tuned for that. If you would then look across the page, which is near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the left is our link to our Patreon page. And if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds to us once a month and become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring patronage allows us to pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this resistance against this, well, it's a takeover of America and all the good that we stand for. And not only want to stand for, but we want to live it. And so we thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders intended oh so many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. I take care of myself, and you can find me at Justice Putnam on Twitter. Yes, indeed. I post the show notes and links diary. It's not a story. It's a diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, hopefully. Well, it gets posted at Daily Codes 10 minutes before showtime. And then hopefully I get it posted up before the show starts on Twitter and other social media platforms. So follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Okay. Got to keep up on those. There's so many out there. Deezer. Has Deezer come and gone? Maybe Deezer is still there. I got to look. Okay, let's tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh, yes, indeed. It's Blue Moon Spirits Friday, so even the virtual French 77s have a effect. So take care, as I mentioned earlier. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, is from the Associated Press by David Bowder and Anthony Izagiri. Oh, all I have to do is scroll on down. Okay, there we go. The U.S. Postal Service's plan to raise mailing rates could present one more damaging blow to community newspapers, already reeling from the coronavirus pandemic and advertising declines. A trade group says, well, of course, rates on periodicals would increase by more than 8% as of August 29th, according to agency filings. The price jump is part of a broad plan pushed by Postmaster General Louis DeJoy to overhaul mail operations and destroy the one thing that's in the Constitution. Yes, a postal service. The impact of the periodical rate increase is expected to be felt most by small daily and weekly newspapers as well as rural newspapers, which depend on the Postal Service since they have shifted from using independent contractors for deliveries. In response, publishers potentially could be forced to further reduce staff or forego home deliveries entirely and instead send papers to communal news racks or even shutter their papers, said Paul Boyle, Senior Vice President of the News Media Alliance, a trade association representing nearly 2,000 news organizations in the U.S. It's one of several nicks and slashes that can damage the bottom line, especially if you are an independent publisher who is operating at break-even or in the low single digits of profitability, and most are, said Penelope Muse Abernathy, a Northwestern University professor who has extensively studied the decline of the news industry. For some, it could be the tipping point for survivability, Boyle said. The News Media Alliance, in comments opposing the rate increases, told the Independent Postal Regulatory Commission that the plans ultimately harm the public interest while doing little to improve the Postal Service's financial condition. Get rid of that stupid pension plan that the Bush Republicans put in to destroy the Postal Service back in the day. And we all know what that is. Yes, they have to fund a pension 70 years in advance for workers that might be working at the Postal Service who are not even born yet. Who does that? Nobody but the Postal Service. Why? There might be a public employees union hidden in there somewhere. Got to get rid of it. Well, if you're intent on destroying representative democracy, you might as well take the postal office out of the equation because it's only part of the Constitution. Josh Israel of the American Independent brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Senator Tom Cotton, a repug from Arkansas, has frequently accused people and organizations of censorship and of belonging to cancel culture. But after the Washington Post published an op-ed in which an Air Force Academy professor explained the importance of teaching about the history of racism in the United States, he is calling for her removal. On Wednesday, Cotton appeared on Fox News and criticized Lynn Chandler Garcia, an associate professor of political science at the Military Academy, for saying that she teaches cadets about critical race theory. In the op-ed published by the Post on Tuesday, Garcia wrote, "As a professor of political science at the U.S. Air Force Academy, I teach critical race theories to our nation's future military leaders because it is vital that cadets understand the history of the racism that has shaped both foreign and domestic policy. I don't coddle my cadets out of fear that exposure to certain literatures might make them uncomfortable or test their existing beliefs." Garcia also cited General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who defended teaching critical race theory during an appearance on June 23rd before the House Armed Services Committee, saying, "What is wrong with understanding? Having some situational understanding about the country for which we are here to defend." It is clear that she knows very little about our Constitution, which is so typical of colleges these days, Cotton drawled. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has testified at least twice that our military does not teach, instruct, condone critical race theory, so Miss Garcia probably should start looking for a different place of employment, in my opinion. He called for oversight of what's being taught to our cadets at the service academies. He said, "I suspect that General Clark, the superintendent of the Air Force Academy, and I will be having a conversation very soon about this." Professor Garcia has no business teaching the Constitution or political science at the Air Force Academy, Cotton tweeted, sharing a video of this appearance on Fox. "We should not be teaching cadets that our military is a fundamentally racist institution." Really? Come on, Tom. Do you think we're that stupid? Jeez. And this guy went to an Ivy League school. I mean, jeez. So he should know better, right? Right? Critical race theory is then explained what critical race theory, and we all know what that is. So while Cotton is now openly working to remove an academic for speaking about her views, he has long been vocal in opposition to those he accuses of censoring conservative voices and violating the First Amendment's free speech protections. Last August, he authored and introduced Senate 4483, the Campus Free Speech Restoration Act, like they need one of those, to amend the Higher Education Act of 1965 to ensure that public institutions of higher education eschew policies that improperly constrain the expressive rights of students, and to ensure that private institutions of higher education are transparent about and responsible for their chosen speech policies. In other words, you can go out there and say, "Heil Hitler, kill all the Jews," and they have a constitutional right to say that. Right there in the square. Too many of Americans' public colleges have attacked the First Amendment rights of their students using so-called free speech zones and unconstitutional speech codes, he cried. This bill fights back against campus censors in order to defend open debate and free speech, which lead us to truth, he said, as he's like telling everybody that Trump really won. Yeah, they're leading us to truth. And then, of course, he wants to go after the tech companies because, hey, the tech companies are the government now. Yeah, he's after the truth. Kowalski of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Oregon adopted an emergency rule yesterday, Thursday, that strengthens requirements for employers to safeguard workers from extreme heat, including expanding access to shade and cool water and what advocates call the nation's most protective heat rules following deadly record-high temperatures in the Pacific Northwest. With these new rules, Oregon has a chance to lead the country in ensuring workplaces are safe from high heat, especially for those doing the most demanding and dangerous jobs like farming and construction, said Kate Swissman, an attorney with the Northwest Workers Justice Project. The emergency rule adopted by the Oregon Occupational Safety and Health Division, or Oregon OSHA, also mandates regular cool-down breaks and communication between employees and supervisors so workers can report concerns. Among the more than 100 people in Oregon who died during the extreme heat wave in late June was an immigrant from Guatemala who was working outside. He was part of a crew at a plant nursery that was moving irrigation lines. And that was Oregon OSHA is investigating both the nursery and the labor contractor. Oregon OSHA is taking an important step forward and leading the nation on standards for outdoor workers, said Rainian Lopez, executive director of the Oregon Farm Workers Union, known by its Spanish acronym as PICUN. It's crucial that we continue to take steps toward long-term policy shifts in our state that take climate change and workers' safety seriously. Oregon OSHA said the temporary rule is effective immediately and stays in place for 180 days. In the face of an unprecedented heat wave in the Pacific Northwest and tragic consequences, it is absolutely critical that we continue to build up our defenses against the effects of climate change, including extreme heat events, said Andrew Stolfe, director of the state agency that includes Oregon OSHA. The heat wave was caused by what meteorologists described as a dome of high pressure over the Northwest and British Columbia that was worsened by human-caused climate change, which is making such extreme weather events more likely and more intense, just like we told them so. Seattle, Portland, and many other cities broke all-time heat records, with temperatures in some places reaching above 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Oregon has recorded 116 deaths from the heat wave, while Washington State said on Thursday yesterday that its toll had risen to 78. Authorities say hundreds of deaths may ultimately be attributed to the heat throughout the region. Amid a historic drought, temperatures are spiking in parts of the U.S. West again this week, but are less intense than the earlier heat wave. Under Oregon's new rules for workers, when the heat index is at or above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, employers are required to provide access to sufficient shade and an adequate supply of drinking water. When the heat index rises above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, employers also must ensure effective communication between workers and supervisors so workers can report concerns, ensure that employees are observed for alertness and signs of heat illness, and provide a cool-down rest period in the shade of 10 minutes for every 2 hours of work. Well, it's something. It is deadly out here. We should remind ourselves of that. And I guess since people won't do it on their own, they have to have these rules. Sorry. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, something fishy. Luca's pretty much the perfect summer movie. From the amazing animation to the plot to the pitch-perfect voice casting, Luca is pretty much guaranteed to please almost everyone. While the main characters are rather improbably sea monsters with shape-shifting abilities on dry land, the film explores timeless human coming-of-age themes, including teenage rebellion and the desire to find one's tribe. In this case, Luca, a sheltered child, is fascinated by dry land. Despite the warnings of his parents, he ventures up and meets Alberto, a fellow sea monster who's been living as a human. Outgoing and fearless, and with a dad who's MIA, Alberto is the perfect foil for the shy Luca. The two quickly bond, and soon Luca is sharing Alberto's dream of acquiring a Vespa and driving off on adventures unknown. Fans of Italian cinema will recognize the nod here to De Sica's classic shoe shine. In order to do this, Alberto decides to enter the town's annual triathlon, becoming friends with fellow outcast Julia, a human girl. In addition to the three main characters, there's a wonderful supporting cast, including Luca's overprotective but loving parents, Julia's fisherman father, and a mustached cat who figures out the boy's secret and is responsible for some of the film's funniest moments. For those who haven't traveled lately, Luca is a cheap escape to Italy without the hassle of flying. Even better, it's the Italy of the early 60s, immortalized by past directors like the aforementioned De Sica and Fellini, with posters advertising their films adorning the town. They didn't make kid-friendly or lighthearted films, but it's a nice touch. With Luca, Pixar continues its mastery of the sweet, but not saccharine. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. They say that practice makes perfect. But sometimes, the best practice is not on a keyboard. It's all in your head. Because a new study shows that the brain takes advantage of the rest periods during practice to review new skills, a mechanism that facilitates learning. The work appears in the journal Cell Reports.
A lot of the skills we learn in life are sequences of individual actions.
Leonardo Cohen, of the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, or NINDS.
For example, playing a piece of piano music requires pressing individual keys in the correct sequence with very precise timing.
That level of virtuosity requires a ton of practice and a lot of repetition. But Cohen says it also requires a certain amount of rest.
We know from previous research that interspersing rest with practice during training is advantageous for learning a new skill. In fact, we recently showed that virtually all early skill learning is evidenced during rest rather than during the actual practice.
It's during those intermittent breaks that the brain starts to sew together the individual movements that make up a seamless piece. And the question then becomes, how? To find out, Cohen and his colleagues turned to an imaging technique called magnetoencephalography, or MEG.
The unique advantage of MEG is that it allows us to observe neural activity across the entire brain with millisecond time resolution, which is crucial for investigating very fast, widespread brain dynamics.
Ethan Bush, Cohen's colleague at NINDS. They and their team had 30 volunteers sit inside an MEG scanner, and they asked them to type the sequence 41324 on a keyboard as quickly and accurately as possible. The participants would type for 10 seconds, rest for 10 seconds, and then repeat, while the researchers monitored their neural activity.
And what we found was really quite interesting. So we actually found that the brain kept replaying much faster versions of the practice activity patterns over and over again during rest.
So, a sequence that might take 1 second for fingers to type would take just 50 milliseconds for the brain to replay.
So that's an impressive 20-fold compression.
The regions most active were those involved in controlling movement and representing sequences, and the more often the brain repeated the sequence, the faster the subject improved.
When the participants were beginning to learn the skill, they were initially typing about 5 to 6 repetitions of the sequence during each 10 seconds of practice. But during rest, the brain replayed about 25 repetitions of the sequence, and that's a 5-fold increase over the same amount of time.
That lightning-quick neural rehearsal supercharges learning and memory.
It's as if the brain actively exploits these rest periods to amplify the effects of practice and rapidly consolidate the skill memory. And this actually appears to be the skill binding mechanism that we were looking for.
So, next time you sit down to practice, give yourself a break, or a lot of little breaks. Your brain and your audience will thank you. For Scientific Americans, 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
One in 6 Americans get sick from eating contaminated food each year. Contamination caused by salmonella is especially common. It's sometimes found in poultry, eggs, ground beef, pork, and even peanut butter. To reduce your risk from this and other foodborne germs, remember to clean, separate, cook, and chill. Clean your hands with soap and water. Separate raw meat, poultry, and seafood from other foods. Wash counters, cutting boards, and utensils before and after using them. Cook all food thoroughly and use a food thermometer to make sure food is cooked. Promptly chill meat, poultry, eggs, and other perishables. Finally, don't prepare food for others if you're sick, and be extra careful when you prepare food for children, pregnant women, the elderly, or people in poor health. To learn more about making food safer to eat, visit www.cdc.gov/vital signs.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Herd immunity is important in stopping deadly viruses, but in politics, the herd instinct can send a whole species over a cliff. Witness the frenzied herd of Republican governors now stampeding behind the scaremongering scheme of Texas Governor Greg Abbott to use the personal suffering of Latin American migrants and asylum seekers as political pawns, rather than helping find a humane solution to the very real plight of these desperate Latin people. Various governors are following Abbott in confronting the migrating families with keep-out military-style force. First came Ron DeSantis of Florida, strutting around in a mucho-macho photo op, pledging to send a small hodgepodge of deputies, highway patrol, and even wildlife officials to Texas for a few days. What will they do? Who will direct them? Who would pay? DeSantis didn't know. Then came Cornhusker Governor Pete Ricketts, proclaiming that Nebraska is stepping up to help Texas respond to the ongoing crisis on their border. But local public officials who are actually on the Texas border say there is a problem, not a crisis, and helter-skelter squads of clueless gendarmes from afar won't help. Still, the hyper-partisan governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, said she was sending a few state troopers to Texas to defend, quote, the health and safety of Iowans. Interestingly, she had refused a request this spring by the Biden administration to help house migrant children crossing our border to seek asylum, coldly declaring, this is not our problem. South Dakota's Kristi Noem also piled on, dispatching some of her state's National Guard troops to Texas. Oddly, though, Noem's troops were not sent as true agents of the state, but 25 political mercenaries paid an undisclosed sum by an out-of-state right-wing billionaire. This is Jim Hightower saying, to monitor this fraud, go to NoBorderWallCoalition.com. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, now live streaming on Facebook from the Chat and Chew Cafe. So grab a libation, pull up a virtual chair, and join our freewheeling conversations with political mavericks, musical agitators, and kick-ass grassroots groups. The Lowdown Happy Hour will connect you to good trouble activists who are building people power across America. Get the lowdown at hightowerlowdown.org.
Riddell High from Greece is back in the news.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
The high school that Riddell High of Greece fame is modeled on is Radnor High in Pennsylvania, where a battle has been raging on whether to keep the school's mascot, a Native American warrior known as the Radnor Red Raider. Complicating this debate is that this mascot was adopted in the 1960s to honor a beloved coach at the school who was a chief of the Oneida tribe, and red was intended only to refer to the school's colors, to distinguish Radnor from an opponent, the Green Raiders. The granddaughter of the beloved coach entered the fray. She expressed the family's, quote, deep conviction that using Native American imagery along with the name Raiders perpetuates racial stereotypes that should no longer be used anywhere, but particularly not in an educational setting. She disavowed the moniker Raiders that, quote, perpetuates a negative stereotype that simply is no longer acceptable. The school board voted 9-0 to remove all the Native imagery and 8-1 to stop using the Raider name, and then the students voted, and Radnor High teams will henceforth be called the Raptors. Congratulations to the school board, the community, and the students of Radnor High. Go Raptors!
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union, because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1935. That was the day transit workers in the Bronx walked off the job in what is referred to as the squeegee strike. These were the days when New York City's public transit was barely organized. 2 of the 3 transit companies in New York City were privately owned, with entrenched company unions. Up to this point, transit bosses had successfully crushed every previous strike. Now, 6 car cleaners at the Jerome Avenue barn had just been fired for refusing management's imposed speed-up. Supervisors had replaced their 10-inch squeegees with those that measured 14 inches. They were expected to clean more in a shorter period of time. According to historian Joshua Freeman, author of In Transit, when word spread that the 6 cleaners had been fired, others downed their tools in protest. They demanded, unsuccessfully, to meet with the shop foreman. After several hours of waiting, they discovered that management had removed their time cards. That's when the 2-day walkout began. As many as 70 workers stormed off the job. Pickets went up outside the barn and at the Interborough Rapid Transit headquarters. The regional NLRB office quickly mediated a settlement that forced the IRT to reinstate the discharged workers and strikers, and to answer their grievances. Freeman notes this first strike, though small in scale and brief, was significant. The victory of the squeegee strike immediately built the TWU's authority citywide. It quickly brought several hundred new members into the union. The new dues-paying members provided a financial base for full-time organizers needed to organize New York City's transit. The union would grow rapidly and soon enjoy a number of organizing victories. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Well, we always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 58 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting to be about 103 to 105. You know how it goes. Well, we're going to keep the cool in from this morning, and that really helps. Plentiful sunshine, the Weather Underground tells us, and winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight, lows in the low to mid-60s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Sunny skies tomorrow. Forecast highs under 100. We'll see about that. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County, in the southern part of Oregon, where we're supposed to take off our masks and mingle inside with each other, have now increased again and now stand at 117,024. And the confirmed deceased remains at 148. Grass pollen is rated high outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 40 parts per million, though there are forest fires, wildfires not terribly far away, that could intrude upon our tranquil, sweet, good air. The daytime UV index remains very high at 9. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.03 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles. And relative humidity is at 72%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 72 and partly cloudy. Paris is 72 and cloudy. Rome is 88 and fair. Kyiv is 87 and fair. Kabul is 90 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 81 and fair. Tokyo is 75 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 52 and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 60 degrees and sunny. And New York is a 72 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy, with a hurricane on its way. So take cover. Don't go into flooded subways. Don't. Okay. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Gordon of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Foreign tourists who are not vaccinated against COVID-19 will not be allowed to enter Canada for quite some time because the government is unwilling to jeopardize progress made on containing the virus, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said yesterday, Thursday. I can tell you right now that's not going to happen for quite a while, said Trudeau when asked by reporters when Canada would allow unvaccinated tourists to enter the country. Canada, as of this week, has waived quarantine requirements for fully vaccinated citizens, but non-essential foreign travelers are still not allowed to enter despite pressure from the country's hurting tourism sector. The United States does not have vaccine requirements for visitors. At this point, talks about lifting border restrictions are focused on fully vaccinated travelers, Trudeau said. The next step will be looking at what measures we can allow for international travelers who are fully vaccinated, he said. We will have more to say in the coming weeks. Trudeau has previously said authorities are looking closely at domestic vaccination rates, the spread of variants of concern, and how the rest of the world deals with COVID-19. A White House official told Reuters on Wednesday that a reopening of U.S. borders to many global tourists will still need more discussion.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
When reporting on murderous autocrats, it's always a safe bet that you should remain anonymous when doing such reportage, and that's why anonymous staff at Reuters brings this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's disapproval ratings rose to the highest level since he came to power 2.5 years ago, with the far-right leader also slipping further behind his main rival ahead of the election in 2022, two polls showed yesterday, Thursday. According to the Data Folha poll, 51% of Brazilians disapproved of Bolsonaro, up from 45% in the previous poll in May, and the highest since he took office in January of 2019. A survey carried out by XP showed 52% of respondents said Bolsonaro's government is doing a bad, terrible job, up from 50% in June and the highest since January of 2019. That figure has also risen steadily from 31% in October as a second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic and inflation almost quadrupling to more than 8% has forced the government to extend emergency cash transfers to millions of poor families. Ahead of next year's elections, former leftist President Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva strengthened his lead over Bolsonaro, and those were showed by the polls as well. Although neither of them have announced their candidacy, the 2022 election is widely expected to be a runoff between the two polarizing figures. Indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we'll meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.